What I'm going to try and do today, quite briefly, is to make a few comments designed to provide a context and a platform for Bryan, who will speak more specifically about Charles Bradlaugh, his struggle to enter Parliament, and the Walter Sickert portrait we celebrate today. What I have to say will fall in three parts. First of all, I want to say a few words about the significance of this particular day, the 9th of September 2017. Second, I want to explain why I think it... I was never going to get that right. You said I had to do it at the end, not at the beginning. Second, I want to explain why it is so fitting that we're meeting in Manchester, a city where I don't live, but did live for 10 years, and I have a passion for Manchester. I have to come back occasionally and get a fix. It's a great city. And thirdly, and finally, I want to talk about one small artefact. This gavel, and what it tells us about Bradlaugh, the National Secular Society, and the British free-thinking, radical or sceptical tradition. So first of all, Today is the 151st birthday of the National Secular Society, precisely on the dot. And hence it does mark, on the dot, the end of the 150th anniversary year. It's a bit of a coincidence, but there you are. On the 9th of September 1866, Bradlaugh published the provisional programme and principles of the National Secular Society in his newspaper, The National Reformer, and proclaimed himself acting president, pending a national conference. The national conference duly took place the next year in Bradford. So, congratulations and happy birthday to the National Secular Society. 1866 was quite a significant date in the sense that it is also the birth year of two other radical campaigning organisations, the Howard League and the Fawcett Society. I don't know whether that's just a coincidence that the three appeared there, but marvellously, all three still exist today, and they're still doing their work. I think it's something of an honour that the National Secular Society can share its birthday with them. But I think it's probably worth adding that the National Secular Society, certainly till quite recently, perhaps post-Second World War, was a little different from the other two, and that it was primarily a working class organisation. That's where it drew its membership and its strength from. And so I think, again, the National Secular Society is particularly interesting because it represents some of the first attempts to organise amongst the working class. Now, the second section about Manchester, I need to put in a health warning. I don't live in Manchester, and I hope I've got these bits and pieces right. And I say that because I'm aware of how strong feeling is about this city. And please don't savage me if I miss important points or get it slightly wrong. The fact of the matter is that the Manchester branch of the National Secular Society was probably the biggest and most important branch outside London. And of course, in this city of liberty and freedom, secularism had very deep roots. So that is important in itself. I've had absolutely no success in locating any sort of branch history. I have tried my best from a distance with the John Rylands Library, and I've tried my best with the Central Library. I was saying to a friend earlier today, I think what I really need to do is camp in Manchester for a week and start going through local history journals and things like that, and perhaps I will find something. But it is rather peculiar that no one has tried to write this up systematically. But there are a few fragments, and here we go. First of all, the branch was active from 1866 to 1913. Though there were always schisms in the secularist movement, I'm afraid freethinkers are an argumentative lot.
There we are.
Oh, yes. I didn't realise you were there. And of course, a huge schism in Bradlaugh's time was the difference of opinion over his publication of birth control literature in 1877. That divided the movement, still does divide it to some extent today, or the legacy of it. The National Secular Society the Manchester branch first occupied premises at 123 Grosvenor Street, Chawdon-on-Medlock. But in 1881 it purchased a hall, a former chapel in Rushmore Street, which could seat over 500. The hall purchase was partly funded from the proceeds of 3 Charles Bradlaugh Lectures that he donated to the Society, and it was here that the portrait had its first hub. 2 annual conferences of the National Secular Society were held in Manchester in 1876 and in 1890. The 1891 is perhaps particularly significant in that it was the first conference after Bradlaugh's resignation. Abel Hayward, an important Manchester name. Abel Hayward was a trustee of the Rushmore Street Hall. We know he was involved with the secularist movement. Hayward was a celebrated Manchester radical, chartist, publisher and bookseller of Oldham Street, once imprisoned for his defiance of the Stamp Acts. He was fined, refused to pay the fine, and went to prison. He was twice mayor of Manchester, was instrumental in the building of the Manchester Town Hall, and was mayor when it opened in 1877. Queen Victoria declined an invitation to attend the opening ceremony. A reason was never given, but it's assumed that she had no wish to be in the company of the mayor. And it's also perhaps worth noting that 1877 was the year when Bradlaugh published Fruits of Philosophy, the pioneering birth control tract. So it was in the news. Bradlaugh himself visited Manchester frequently, as with all the northern cities. For example, in 1871, he addressed a packed free trade hall on the topic, the impeachment of the House of Brunswick. His speech was later published as a pamphlet and became something of a radical Republican manifesto. To give you a flavour, here's the closing peroration of the printed version. I loathe these small German breast-bestarred wanderers, whose only merit is their loving hatred of one another. In their own land they vegetate and wither unnoticed. Here we pay them highly to marry and perpetuate a pauper prince race. If they do nothing, they are good. If they do ill, loyalty gilds the vice until it looks like virtue. Thank goodness things are different today. Finally, bear in mind, the Manchester branch only catered for the city. Edward Royal, who's written the definitive histories of secularism in the 19th century, he lists 32 secular societies in Lancashire, in the 1880s. From time to time, these branches formed regional secular unions as well. Places like Stockport, Failsworth, Atherton, Tyldesley all had their own secular societies, as did all the cotton towns. I move on to my third and final section, the gavel. Deep in the bowels of the Conway Hall in Holborn, that's London, are the NSS offices. And in a cupboard, they keep the gavel. And I hope they take good care of it. On the 16th of February 1889, a special NSS conference was called. And ailing Bradlaugh, now overburdened with parliamentary work, had made his decision to resign as president and to propose George William Foote as his successor. When the moment came, he presented this gavel, this very one, to Foote and said this: "I tender the only emblem of office we have. This hammer, presented to us by the widow of James Watson, was used in the old rotunda, in days when such freedom as we now enjoy was impossible. Carlyle often used it. I give it to you joyfully, Foote, and trust you'll hand it to your successor." And it's got some names inscribed on it, just on the metal end here. The first owner was Richard Carlyle, who spent more than 10 of his 53 years in jail. His crime was to publish and sell the works of Thomas Paine. During the early 19th century and the years of repression. It's impossible to give a starting point to the radical free-thinking tradition, but we can't ignore the significance of Thomas Paine and writings such as The Rights of Man and The Age of Reason, which popularised secularist ideas. Not that they were called secularists then. Paine thought governments were there to benefit ordinary people, not at the convenience of monarchs. He poured scorn on the idea of the divine right of kings and regarded revealed religion as a prop to authoritarian rule. These writings were published and sold by Carlyle, together with revolutions in France and North America, both of which Paine was active in. This struck terror into the heart of the British establishment and triggered a wave of repressive legislation generally known as Six Acts or Gag Acts. I need to mention, and I think this is quite important, that there's an interesting link between Manchester and Carlisle. Carlisle attended the mass meeting at St Peter's Fields on the 16th of August 1819 that you're going to be celebrating shortly. And he was standing on the hustings with the main act, orator Henry Hunt, when the yeomanry charged. Carlyle was due to speak after Hunt. After the event, he returned to London and published the first issue of a new journal called The Republican. The Republican was the first journal to record the events at St Peter's Fields. Some people, and I'm not sure of the evidence for this, because I've actually read through those first issues of The Republican, but some people claim that it was Carlyle who coined the term Peterloo. He certainly was the first to record the event. A second name on the gavel is James Watson. Like Carlyle, a publisher, bookseller, freethinker, and London Chartist, who worked closely with William Lovett, the leading moral force Chartist. He also knew the inside of London's jails. Other names include Bradlaugh's own, and those of his successor presidents, G.W. Foote and Chapman Cohen, both of whom served as presidents for a long, long time. Cohen was the longest serving. What I'm suggesting is that this gavel symbolises a radical, free-thinking tradition and links the society of today all the way back to Thomas Paine. And I think that's pretty extraordinary. Bradlaugh was magnificent. And Bryan will tell you how magnificent in a moment. Bryan was magnificent. Bryan is magnificent. Bradlaugh was magnificent. But he was part of a tradition. He didn't come from thin air. He was just his generation's principal standard bearer for a tradition of a long and continuing history. In conclusion, I would suggest to you that popular history is inclined to be establishment history and ignores, or worse, takes the credit for, the work and sacrifices and triumphs of those generally poor people who struggle for change. Some of us, and I'm not, just before I say the next bit, I'm troubled actually that this morning I was floating around Manchester and went to the People's History Museum. It's not one mention of Bradlaugh in the People's History Museum. Not a single mention. Paine just about gets a mention. The secularist tradition doesn't get a mention. I think there's some reasons for this, but this would take a long while to expand upon. But it's troubling. So some of us have to keep these traditions alive. Bryan Niblett's highly readable biography of Bradlaugh does just that. So thank you very much.